session.
Be seated.
Yes, Mr. Chief.
Yes, sir, I do. Mr. Ciesly, in previous testimony, he's obviously, at this point, is able to talk about any of his findings as it relates to the phones for Mr. Segura and the testimony of Sergeant Corbett. Last time we were here, he also testified as to phone locations for Mr. Griffin, whereas it's possible that that could become relevant at some point. At this point, we have not laid any foundation as to the fact of Mr. Griffin's involvement in any way, shape, or form with this particular crime. Mr. Santos may or may not, depending on how that goes, of course, and of course we've already ruled out Mr. Griffin. So at this point, there's been no foundation for him to testify regarding Griffin's phone number or the phone contents at this particular time, and we would object to that, as well as phone records coming in from Mr. Griffin.
Are you planning to get into that, Mr. Prince?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'll sustain that objection at this point in time. It's just going to cause confusion. Be talking about somebody they know nothing about at this point in time and may never know anything about it. So anyway.
Well, I guess let me clarify, because the court had previously ruled that the whole piece of testimony regarding DeMario Paramore and Haywood Griffin, the operation that was run with a confidential informant, which produced their confession, which Lieutenant Basio himself heard and testified to during the last trial. When you pair the confession that implicates both the...
When I hear that testimony, that not rule, maybe allow Mr. Swicky to testify. We haven't had that testimony, so it's only going to cause confusion at this point in time.
Yes, sir. Then I would call Lieutenant Basio instead at this point, if it's all right with the court.
Okay.
Your Honor, of course, Mr. Basio, I think it's Sergeant Basio at this point, but anyway, as far as his testimony goes, there is what's going to be elicited is the recording allegedly said by Gregory Washington, and given those circumstances, Your Honor, at this point there's been no identification of Gregory. Last time we had Gregory Washington come before and testify about who was on the phone, who was on the recording, what circumstances surrounding the recording, and everything along those lines before we heard it. In this particular case, we're putting in Sergeant Basio up without any of those explanations about who those parties are or anything along those lines, and the only identificational aspect they have on that is through Greg Washington, who he has not testified at this particular time. So I would object to the order of that as well, because the foundation has not been laid for this particular piece of evidence.
I thought Lieutenant Basio was present.
He was not present. He was monitoring the audio recording, but he was not present to identify the persons that were on it.
For clarity's sake, he did conduct a custodial interview after that recording took place, and he questioned DeMario Paramore about that.
Who are you planning to call? What are you planning to call him about?
The fact that they ran an operation utilizing a confidential informant, that the informant was affixed with a wire, that the informant was sent out to talk to DeMario Paramore, that DeMario Paramore did in fact confess to himself and Mr. Griffin being involved in the murder, that Mr. Basio heard that himself and then talked to Mr. Paramore after that in a custodial setting interview, and that based on the information provided by Mr. Paramore, the Tallahassee Police Department did not follow up on evidence that may have either included or excluded Paramore and Griffin as suspects in the case.
And Your Honor, can clarify whether he's going to have Officer or Sergeant Basio testify as to the recording or play the actual recording itself? I would argue that he's not playing the recording and simply Investigator Basio describing it. That's not the best evidence. The best evidence would be actually recording.
As you recall, the recording doesn't exist.
That's right.
those, I mean, they're clearly statements against penal interest, but for that exception to apply, the declarant has to be unavailable. What showing do we have that Washington and Paramore are not available?
Your Honor, they weren't admitted as hearsay exceptions last time. They were admitted pursuant to Chambers. The court made a threshold finding that the statements were reliable based on the fact that Investigator Basio at the time listened to them over the wire. Chambers, again, basically stands for the proposition that when there's an out-of-court confession, if there's any corroborative evidence whatsoever, I'm summarizing obviously, it has to be admitted, and it was admitted on that basis pursuant to due process previously.
And Your Honor, last time the difference is Gregory Washington did in fact testify prior to this recording coming in, and therefore there was corroborative evidence. In this particular case, there is not.
Gregory Washington testified to out-of-court statements as well. The point is that it's not a hearsay analysis, it's a Chambers analysis, and that's the basis on which they were admitted previously.
And Your Honor, there
Is
actually
Washington available or not?
is.
Yes?
What?
He is.
Right. I don't think there's a reason to invoke Chambers unless the witness is unavailable. Things change when between whether the witness testifies or not, does not testify. So I'm not going to let Basio testify in absence of testimony from Washington. I know he's a little bit of a loose cannon, and things kind of went both ways with him last time, but if he's available as a witness, I'm not going to just let Basio get up and testify.
Your Honor, my position is, I guess I don't need to state it if the court's already ruled.
I've ruled.
So,
I mean, I'm not saying that Basio cannot testify, but I'm going to have to hear from Washington first.
yes, sir. Then I'm going to need Washington up.
It'll take at least 10 minutes, Judge, to get him on.
Anything else we need to sort out while we're doing it?
Not this time, Your Honor. I don't know. The only reason they're coming issues is because the order being called in. If they're called in a different order, then they wouldn't have been an issue, but that's kind of why the objections are happening.
Well, I'm sure Mr. Prince would rather not call Gregory Washington.
I'm sure he
could
would.
help it, given the way it turned out last time. But anyway, so I mean, I don't criticize the order. I'm just.
No, I'm just saying that's why I've been bringing up the issues is because of that aspect.
Anything else we can sort out? while
Not
we're waiting
from the
on him
defense.
to be brought up.
Not from the defense, Your Honor.
You- So you have an idea how much you're going to have, Mr. Prince?
Yes, sir. I was hoping, and I don't know, we may have to, if the court permits us to go late today to do this. I was hoping to get through Santos, now Washington, Basio, Sawicki, and then some short witnesses, Dahana Scott and Cicely Timmons today. I don't know.
I think if we started on Santos right now, we wouldn't be done this afternoon. Given what I've heard in the past, I've never heard a short answer from him.
That's true. Maybe it would be better given the time to do Santos tomorrow, and that doesn't really mess my order up. So, but Dahana Scott has a flight, so I do intend to call her today, no matter what.
Remind me what that involves.
She was the neighbor right next to Miss Peters' house.
The barking dog.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, that's kind of independent of everything else.
Yes, sir.
If you want to go ahead and call her, what?
Yeah, we can do that.
Washington brought up.
Yes, sir. That's fine.
I'll go with that. Why don't you get him somewhere close and we'll get this other witness.
You want to pick that up that you dropped?
What's that?
Can you pick that up that you dropped in the box?
I can.
Okay, are we ready for the jury again?
Hold on, I gotta get.
Let's get it. Is that your stuff or is that the jury's stuff?
I could do it. I was doing two things at one time. That's why I was trying to get you to do it for me. All rise for the jury.
But if you see it, please, you would face the clerk here, raise your right hand, please, ma'am. Be sworn.
swear affirm testimony you about to give in this case to be true, whole truth, and nothing but truth, so help you God.
I do.
Ms. Scott, can you please introduce yourself to the jury? Spell both your first and last name for the court reporter.
My name is Dahana Scott, Delta Alpha Hotel Alpha November Alpha Scott Sierra Cat Oscar Tango Tango.
And where were you living back in November of 2010? Where was
Tallahassee,
that?
Florida.
I'm sorry. Where was that house located relative to Brandy Peters' house?
She was my direct neighbor to my right.
Okay. And there was a fence that separated y'all's property?
Correct.
Okay. Directing your attention to the late night hours of November 19th, 2010, you remember about what time you got home that night?
Around 11.
And when you arrived home, did you notice any vehicles in Miss Peters' driveway?
I believe there was like a white SUV parked on the side.
Okay. And at some point after you arrived home, did you let your dog outside?
We have two dogs. We had one that stayed inside with my daughter and myself, and then we had another dog that was outside, that stayed outside at all times.
At some point after you arrived, did your dogs, or one of your dogs, or both of your dogs, start barking vigorously?
Zeus, the one that stayed outside.
Okay. And what direction was he barking in?
He was pacing along the fence line towards Brandy's house.
Okay. And how long did that go on?
Quite a while.
Okay. What did he? Did you observe your dog go off in any other direction, or did he continue to focus on the fence?
No, he was by the fence.
Adjacent to Brandy's yard? Okay. How long after you got home do you think he started barking like that?
Well, I was actually on the phone with a friend of mine, and it had to be after 2 a.m. It was like in the wee hours of the morning.
Okay. You have a floodlight on the side of your house
Correct.
closest to Brandy, correct? At some point, did that light come on?
I don't remember. I know it came on when I went outside.
Okay. And
Kinda.
were you able to see or hear anything going on in Brandy's yard?
No,
It was just your dog alerting?
just the dog. Yeah.
Okay. Was that abnormal for him?
It is, because Zeus was still a puppy, so he doesn't really make noise unless he hears something, or if someone triggers the light, or if another dog in the neighborhood barks, then he'll bark. But for the most part, that's why we kept him outside, because if it wasn't directly dealing between both neighbors' house where the fence line was, he relatively stayed quiet all the time.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Go ahead.
So you came home around 11 o'clock and you saw an SUV parked where?
On the side, we live at when you first come into the subdivision, there's a cul-de-sac, and then there's a road that continues for Saddle Creek Run. So most people, when you're visiting anyone, you don't pull into the driveway, you park on the side by the house.
Okay, so you're talking about the curb.
The curb.
So you're on the curb, you're talking about you saw an SUV on the curb in the vicinity of her house.
Correct. They were parked in between Brandy's house and my ex-husband and I house.
Okay, all right. Don't know where the occupant of that car was in any way, shape, or form, correct?
No.
Okay. And that was around 11 o'clock?
Correct.
And around 2 o'clock, the dog started barking.
Correct.
Okay, and you don't know what the dog was barking at?
No.
I noticed you said tango, and you were basically using the alphabet. Were you military?
No.
Okay. All right. I was just curious.
Yeah.
It's fair to say that whenever sound carries a long way at night, right? Things get a lot louder at night, so you don't want your dog out there barking and stuff.
That is correct. It was a quiet neighborhood.
Okay. Quiet neighborhood, and you notice your dog barking when you're on the phone, right?
Correct.
You ever hear a gunshot?
No.
Did you hear 2 gunshots?
No.
10 gunshots?
No.
Didn't hear it at the time you saw the SUV. Didn't hear it at the time that Zeus was barking.
Never heard a peep other than just the dog.
Okay.
All right, no further questions. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Scott, you testified before during direct examination that you think that maybe the SUV was parked on the street in front of Ms. Peters' house. Is that what you were saying?
Well, there's not a lot of room in between the houses, per se. So the vehicle wasn't our guest. So anyone that's pulling, the vehicle wasn't our guest. So if someone was parking where the vehicle was parked, it would have been for Ms. Peters, because majority of the vehicle was in catty corner to her house.
He doesn't know where he's testified where.
Overruled. I'll let you cross.
Yeah. So just to clarify, you're saying today that the vehicle was in the road as opposed to in?
No, it wasn't in the road. It was on the curb by her house.
Okay.
So if I can demonstrate, let's say this notch here is Brandy's house. My finger is my house. The vehicle was parked on the curb in front of Brandy's house.
Do you recall during earlier proceedings being asked the question, when you got home, did you notice any vehicles in Ms. Peters' driveway? And responding, off my recollection, there was like a white SUV in the driveway. Is that right?
Probably so. I mean, I'm medicated. I'm sorry. And two, it's been a couple of years. It's been a long time, but I do remember there was still a white SUV
Okay.
there.
Would you say that your memory of the facts pertaining to that night was better further back in time than it is today?
Correct.
So we should defer to what you said earlier.
Originally, correct.
Thank you. No further questions.
I'll let you cross on the location.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Oh, there we go.
All right, this is our road we're talking about?
That is correct.
Okay. And the house, where's your house at? Two. Right here.
Oh,
Get a little button right there at the top.
oh, thank you. Remembering correctly, I want to say this is our house. Wait, no, because I planted one of these two.
Wait till you get your thoughts straight before you start talking, because this lady's trying to take down what
I'm
you say.
sorry.
So
Okay.
you just be quiet till there's a question. Okay. Right. So the question is, which is your house? Is that your house? Or are you certain? Which one is your house?
This one here.
Okay.
I'm looking for the tree that I planted, but I don't know how updated or how old this diagram is. When we bought the house, I planted a tree here, which I don't see. So I don't know if this is when the subdivision was originally built or if this is a more updated
And you're
picture.
saying, okay, hypothetically, this is your house.
Mhm.
Where's the SUV?
It would have been here. Sorry.
On the street?
Well, it would have been, well, no, it wasn't in the driveway. It was here.
Okay.
It wasn't pulled up to the garage. It was like here.
Okay. You don't have any idea what that car was involved with in any way, shape, or form, correct?
No.
Okay. Again, didn't hear any gunshots going off.
No.
Either of that thing.
No.
Houses are all close together here.
Mm-hmm.
There's a party, people are gonna park, if you had, multiple people there, 3 or 4 people cars, that they're gonna park obviously in your neighbors, adjacent to your neighbor's house, right?
Well, beautifully at that time, a lot of the neighbors in our subdevelopment were not college students. My ex-husband at the time was a sergeant for the Department of Juvenile Justice, and the neighbor directly across from us was also juvenile justice. Our neighbor to the left
Not a lot of
worked.
parties, you're saying.
It wasn't that type of neighborhood.
By party, I don't mean necessarily like a.
Or get together.
I'm talking about
Yeah.
people coming over.
Sorry. Get together, no. At that time, we pretty much, whenever we had any type of get-togethers, we would communicate with each other because we would ask, our neighbors if it was okay, if we could use their driveway or use their curb for any additional parking from visitors coming.
Right, but nobody contacted that, but you weren't home, correct?
Correct.
All right, so you did, well, again, you really don't know where that car was associated with. You know it was by your house, but again, didn't hear any gunshots associated with it.
No,
Okay. All right.
no gunshots. I'm very familiar with what a gunshot sounds like.
You are familiar with?
I am. My ex-husband and I used to go to the gun range all the time.
Okay.
So,
Well, then let's ask this. Get home at 11 o'clock. Hear any gunshots?
no,
Hear any gunshots until 2 o'clock in the morning when you're on the phone with your neighbor or
no.
with your friend?
My ex-husband came home around 4 o'clock that morning, and I was up until about 4:30 because I even told him about the dog barking. And I made the joke. I said, more than likely, one of the neighbors, are going to call or called to complain about the dogs barking. But no gunshot.
No gunshots. Familiar with gunshots? Never heard
Right,
of one.
Mr. Fuchs, I didn't open it up for you to totally recross. That was a limited
Yes, Your Honor.
subject.
No further questions.
Anything further, Mr. Prince?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Do we need to keep her any further?
No, sir.
All right. You're excused?
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I should have asked any juror have a question of this witness. I'm sorry. I forget sometimes. All right. Go ahead. You can help Ms. Scott down. We want Washington next.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Come on in, sir. No, bring him in. Raise your right hand and be sworn, please, sir.
You swear affirm testimony about the giving this case to be truth, whole truth, and nothing but truth, so help you God.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, have a seat, please, sir. Slide on up a little bit further, if you would, please, sir.
Mr. Washington, can you please spell both your first and last
I'm
name?
not testifying.
State your name, please, sir.
Gregory Washington, but I'm not testifying.
Ask him a question.
Mr. Washington, back in 2010, at some point, did you have a criminal offense pending?
I'm not testifying.
All right, let the jury step out. Everybody be seated. Mr. Washington, you've already given this testimony once before, so what's the issue today?
You got me on live TV.
Well, you were on live TV last
I
time.
know I'm not testifying.
Well, you've already given this testimony once.
I'm not testifying.
All right. All right.
I asked to speak. I spoke with Mr. Prince concerning this issue. I wrote him and I contacted his office and I explained to him my situation. I asked him to speak with me. I talked with people in his office. They know why I'm not testifying, but he still got me up here like this. Like I told him the first time. And I talked to him and I talked to him again. He's knows my situation. I told him I'm not testifying for a certain reason. Mr. Prince is aware of that, sir. It's not the point of that me refusing. I explained to him why he should have addressed the court about this issue. But it's obvious that he did not address the court about this issue. So I don't know if he's doing it out of vindictive or whatever it is, but I wrote him and I talked with several people in his office. As a matter of fact, I talked to a lady right there, sitting right there, and I
All right,
explained to
that's
him.
enough, Mr. Washington. How do you wish to proceed, Mr. Prince?
Your Honor, my position is that his former testimony could be admitted if it's essential. If the court is not going to require us to produce the former testimony, I would suggest that an acceptable alternative would just be to have the testimony come from Sergeant Vasio instead.
Mr. Pugh?
Your Honor, my position is Mr. Washington's testimony has been previously available. It is available for both readback. It's also available for recording where they can actually see Mr. Washington. It has been subject to cross-examination and would request as far as his testimony goes that that would be the one that is replayed. If he's refusing to testify at this particular time, his prior testimony is certainly available and can be either read into the record or it can be shown via video to the jury.
So nobody wants me to compel Mr. Washington?
That would be my preference, Your Honor, because there are things that Mr. Washington went into last time that I don't want to go into this time. Obviously, if the state has testimony they wish to elicit from him that's outside the scope of my direct, they can call back and do that. But I would prefer that he testify live about his knowledge of the out-of-court confession and how he got documented as a CI and what was said while he was doing the CI operation.
So why are you refusing to testify, Mr. Washington?
Mr. Prince, you know why I wrote him,
Well,
I
I
talked to
didn't
him
ask
on,
Mr. Prince, I asked you.
it deals with
What's,
what was said last time and labeled me as a CI and all this other stuff, the trial and tribulation my family done went through and going through, and my name being put all in the newspaper and all on the news. It put a real bearing on my family members. And I explained to him my situation. He knows that if he had any concern about this situation, the client wanted me to testify. I asked him not to be testifying in front of the camera, but he chose not to do that.
well, we
So
don't have the option of closing the courtroom. That's not an option, Mr.
yeah.
Washington.
Well, I just
I'm not inclined to compel him. I think this is going to cause more confusion than it's going to help. You can use his prior testimony. I think there needs to be a predicate. So probably hadn't considered how you were going to do that at this point in time. Do you have?
Everything, Mr. Fuchs and I.
You can take him out.
Mr. Fuchs and I have stipulated regarding Ms. Hawkins, another witness who's going to be unavailable, that we would pull her video from YouTube and then have the jurors follow along with the transcript. I'm not ready to do that right now, but that would be my proposal for dealing with Mr. Washington. I'll just change the order. If there's some time frame issue, witnesses that I can run through here instead of getting into Mr. Washington.
Who do you want to call?
Who do I want to call next? Call Darius now. We'll call Darius now next.
Yeah. Come on up here. All right, let's have jury in, please. Jury. We still need one of them. Hold on, let's see.
Yes, sir.
I don't know. No, I don't.
All rise for the jury.
All right, if you face the clerk and be sworn, please.
Yes, ma'am.
You swear affirm testimony about to give in this case, be true, the whole truth, and nothing but true self you got.
So, yes.
All right, have a seat. Slide up the microphone, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. I don't see a microphone.
What's that?
I don't see a microphone.
It's up there. If you just slide
Okay.
to the railing, it'll be there.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. May I proceed, Mr. Prince?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Mount, can you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell both your first and last name?
Yes, my name is Darius Mount. First name is Darius Mount, Mount.
And back in November of 2010, were you living over in the area of Saddle Creek Road?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And how was your house positioned to Brandy Peters' house?
I'm probably, I'd say about 3 or 4 houses down. Yeah, 3 or 4 houses down, and then I guess the street that I'm on runs perpendicular to the street that she's on, as far as I can, as far as how I'm explaining it, I guess.
Okay, so there's kind of a T, her road meets your road,
Right.
and you lived right there?
Right.
Okay. About how far would you say your house was from hers?
I'd say maybe about a football field length.
Okay. At some point that evening, did you all hear a dog barking in a really vigorous manner?
Absolutely. It was definitely out of the ordinary.
And that's what I was going to ask you next. To your recollection, had you ever noticed the dog in your neighborhood barking quite that vigorously before?
No, around that time, I was a manager employed at Golden Corral. So I would come home around that time of night all the time. So, getting out of my car, and going into the house, it was always pretty quiet. What I was hearing that night was out of the ordinary.
Okay. How long well, I guess let me ask you this first. What time do you think you got home at?
Whew, it's been a while. I was at 2010. Honestly, I want to be honest.
Don't remember?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's been.
Would it refresh your recollection if I showed you your prior testimony?
That would help.
Yeah. Just read it for yourself.
It would have been between just about 1:15.
Okay. And was that roughly the time you would normally get home during that time frame?
Right around 1 a.m.
Okay. Was your wife already home when you got home?
She was.
Okay. And what did you all do about the barking dog?
I mean, if I remember correctly, I brought it to her attention, and then at some point we called the police.
So it was out of the ordinary enough that it made you think that summoning law enforcement was necessary.
Yeah, just to see what was going on. I mean, it was loud, so
And-
and it was different. It was
I'm sorry.
not what I'm used to.
That's what I was going to ask. That had never happened before. The dog had never been going crazy to the point where you guys were worried and called the police, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Mount, fair to say you have no idea what the dog was barking at?
No.
Whenever you would agree with me that sound travels a lot more at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning than it does at 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, correct?
Right, I would agree.
Okay. Whenever you were drawing the attention to the dog, did you pull in your garage, or how did you get into your house?
I go through the front door. I don't pull into my garage.
When you got out of your car, you could hear the dog barking at that point?
I did.
Okay. When you walked in your house, could you hear the dog barking?
I could.
Did you go back outside and listen to the dog barking?
I believe so with my wife. If I remember, I think we kind of talked about if it was too much of an extreme to call the cops or whatever. But I think after I talked to her, if I remember correctly, because it's been so long, we were like, it's a little weird. Let's call the cops.
You go outside and see if maybe you could hear anything else going on, give an explanation as to why the dog was barking.
No, I think at that point I don't have no S on my chest, so I'm taking it on in.
Fair enough. Did you, when you got out of your car and walked in the door and heard the dog barking, did you hear any gunshots?
No.
Did you hear one gunshot?
No, sir.
You hear two gunshots?
No.
You hear 10 gunshots?
No.
When you walked outside and you heard the dog with your wife, did you hear one gunshot?
No.
Two gunshots?
No.
10 gunshots?
No.
When you were inside the home, you could hear the dog barking. You agree with me, gunshots are a little bit louder than a dog barking.
We can touch and agree on that.
I'm sorry?
I said we can touch and agree. Let's say out a silencer or something. I don't know.
Unless there's a suppressor, right?
Right.
You would agree then that when you were inside your house, you could hear a dog barking. You didn't hear one gunshot?
No.
Didn't hear two gunshots?
No, sir.
Didn't hear 10 gunshots?
Absolutely not.
All right, no further questions.
Redirect.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Any juror have questions this witness? If not, you can step down. We need to keep him further.
No, Your Honor, he can be excused. Nothing to take, Your Honor.
All right, you're free to go. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You have another witness available. Brent?
Yes, sir, Your Honor. This time the defense will call Marquis Davis.
You would face the clerk on each one, please.
Okay. You swear affirm testimony about giving this case will be true, whole truth, and nothing but truth, so help you God.
Yes, ma'am.
You have a seat. Out of the room, please, sir. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Davis, can you please state and spell both your first and last name for the court reporter?
Marquis Davis, Marquis Davis.
And where were you living back in November of 2010? Where was that relative to Brandy Peters' house?
Not directly across the street, like parallel across from.
Right straight across the street. Who did you live there with?
My son's mom, Ciesly Timmons.
And she goes by Cicely, is that right?
Yes.
Cicely was like Brandy's best friend at the time, correct?
Yeah, they hung out every day.
Okay. And it would be common for you to make all of the kids, well, let me clarify that. So the twins, Javante, they would come over to y'all's house and play with your kids regularly?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And would it be a common occurrence for you to make all of the kids dinner?
Pretty much I could pretty much every day.
Okay. I'd like to direct your attention to the evening of November 19th, 2010. Were you cooking that night?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall what you were making?
Oxtails, rice. I'm not sure the whole meal, but I know I cooked oxtails that day.
Okay. And at some point, did Javante, Tamaya, and Tanaya come over and eat at your house?
Yes, sir.
You recall about what time that was?
Around 6:37.
Okay. And how long did they stay there and eat for?
Maybe 30 minutes.
I'm sorry?
Maybe 30, 45 minutes, 30 minutes.
Okay, so they started eating at 6:37, took about half an hour, so they would have finished up around 7:30?
Yeah.
Okay. What about Brandy? Did you send in any food over for Brandy to eat?
Yes, sir.
What time do you think that was at?
When the kids finished up eating.
About 7:30? Okay. Did you send that plate of food over with one of the twins, or did you take it over there yourself?
I sent it with the kids.
Okay. At some point, did you make a plate of food and drive it up north to the north side of town where your dad lived?
Yes, sir.
And what time did you get back?
between 8:30, like 8:30, before 9 o'clock.
Okay. And when you returned, did you see a vehicle in Brandy Peter's driveway?
Yes, sir.
What kind of vehicle was it?
A black or dark blue Suburban.
Okay. Now, have you ever met Mr. Segura?
No.
You knew who he was, though?
I mean, I know him. I grew up in Tallahassee. I mean, I don't, you know.
Okay. Were you familiar with his green truck?
Yes, I seen his truck before.
You and Mr. Segura, did you know each other at all?
No, sir.
Do you know each other at all now?
I mean, yeah.
How's that?
I mean, I know him from, you know, from this case, and, you know, I seen him coming back and forth from Brandy House.
So you were familiar with who he was back then?
Yeah, I knew, and, you know, I know who he was. Yeah.
Okay. But you guys weren't like friends or anything, correct?
No, sir.
All right. What about your relationship with Brandy? Were you friends with Brandy too?
I knew her before she moved over there, because I had a cousin that used to date her when her twins were younger. She didn't even have Devontae then.
All right. And how about your relationship with the kids? You've indicated you would make them dinner occasionally.
I mean, yeah, they played with my son. They were the same age. Well, Devontae was the same age as my son.
Okay. So kind of a, community caretaker. You would take care of her kids, and she'd do the same sometimes?
Pretty much.
Okay. As far as Mr. Segura goes, you didn't have any relationship with him whatsoever?
No, sir.
Okay. But you were familiar with his truck?
Yes, sir.
And the vehicle that you're referring to that you saw in her driveway at 8:30 or so, the dark-colored SUV, that was not Mr. Segura's truck, correct?
No, I had never seen it before.
You'd never seen that vehicle before?
No.
Thank you. No further questions.
Well,
Mr. Davis, you said something about the food. You cook food for the kids?
Yes, sir.
Did you do so on that night?
Did I what?
Cook food for them that night?
Yes, I mean, I cooked for my family, but, you know, they were there, so, you know.
Well, what time was it that the kids came over?
Like I said, 6:30, 7 o'clock.
Isn't it true, Mr. Davis, that the first time that you told anybody this was actually back in 2017? You never told law enforcement any of this the night or the day they were out there investigating stuff?
No, I didn't.
Okay. You never walked up to them and said, hey, by the way, I saw them that night that they supposedly were murdered?
No.
Got law enforcement all over the place asking questions of your son, asking questions of Cicely. You didn't say anything, did you?
No, but at the time when that happened, I was working a lot, and, you know, I wasn't home like that.
Wasn't home that way, like that?
I wasn't home like that. I worked a lot. I was working at Sonny's. I was a manager at Sonny's Barbecue. I worked a lot.
Didn't tell law enforcement, hey, by the way, I saw a car in the driveway at 8 o'clock that evening that could have been involved in this homicide of a woman and 3 kids that was friends with your wife and her and your son.
I didn't know it was relevant at the time.
Didn't know it was relevant that a car was sitting in the driveway, supposedly, at a homicide scene the night of the homicide.
I mean, I didn't know it was relevant at the time.
Mr. Davis, Artron Timmons is your son you're talking about, correct?
Stepson.
Okay. And Mr. Timmons has come in here and told us that. So you didn't give every statement to law enforcement on that particular day, correct?
No, I didn't.
What you're testifying to has to do with stuff that now you're. One moment. But the bottom line is, law enforcement's all over there investigating murder of a woman, her 3 kids, friends with your wife, friends with your son. You've seen them at your house before. You cooked dinner for them, and you didn't feel the need to tell anybody any of this information back then, correct?
I mean, I thought that, everybody knew that they was at my house. It wasn't for me to tell that they was at my house. I thought everybody knew that they was already at the house.
But you're the only one who saw the car.
I believe so.
The supposed car? Didn't tell anybody about that, did you?
Like I said, that part I didn't know was relevant at the time.
No further questions.
Mr. Timmons, I'm sorry, Mr. Davis, did you have any knowledge that there was an issue with time of death following the murders?
No, sir, I never knew.
Okay. And you weren't home when law enforcement was canvassing the neighborhood looking for witnesses on the 20th?
No.
Okay. Was there any reason, or is there any reason why you didn't come forward, in the weeks or months following the murder and volunteer to law enforcement the information you had beyond that you didn't know it was relevant?
I didn't know it was relevant. That's the only reason.
Okay.
I found out about my seeing the SUV that was relevant when the investigators came and talked to me.
When the defense investigators found you? That was the first time anybody had questioned you about this
Yes,
case,
sir.
correct? Thank you. No further questions.
Any jurors have question of this witness? All right. You can step down. We need to keep it any further?
No, we can be released.
You need to,
No.
you're excused. Go your next witness.
This time the defense will call Cicely Timmons.
Call who?
Cicely Timmons. All right, we approach, just make sure we're on the same page about an exhibit.
Testimony about to give in this case will be truth, whole truth, and nothing but truth, so help you God.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Timmons, can you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell both your first and last name for the court reporter?
My name's Cicely Timmons, CIESLY-TIMMONS.
And who was Brandy Peters to you back in November 2010?
She was my neighbor and my friend.
How long had y'all been friends for?
Oh, just a couple of months, like 6 months.
In that amount of time, had y'all gotten pretty close?
Yeah, we was cool.
You'd be together during the day a lot of times,
When we dropped the kids off, for the most part, yeah.
and you would help each other taking care of each other's kids.
I mean, we both wasn't working. We would drop our kids off the daycare and come back. But, I mean, in the evening times, the kids would play together, but
Okay.
not babysitting.
And were you with Brandy at various points during the day on, was it Thursday or Friday that you were with her?
I think it was Thursday.
Okay, Thursday. You were with Brandy throughout the day on Thursday then?
I believe so.
Okay. At some point that day, and I don't want you to go into content, but at some point that day, did Brandy Peters come over to your house with a letter that she had received that
Yes.
day? May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Let the record to reflect, I'm going to show the witness what will be marked for identification as defense 16. Can you tell me whether you recognize this envelope? You can pick it up and look at it.
Yeah.
Do you recognize that?
Yeah.
What is it?
So the envelope that the letter came in that she brought to my house.
Brandy had that with her?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it a true and accurate depiction of the envelope that she showed you that day?
Yes.
Here, at this time, I would move to admit what's been pre-marked as defense 16 into evidence as defense 16.
Any further objection?
Nothing further, Your Honor, other than what's already been stated.
To be admitted.
Ms. Timmons, when Ms. Peters came over, and I don't want you to tell us what your conclusions were about her attitude or mood, but can you describe physically what you saw Brandy acting like?
She was scared.
Again, I don't want your conclusion about it. I'd like to ask you about what you observed. How did you observe Brandy acting?
Nervous?
Why do you say that?
I mean, she clearly was nervous because of the letter.
And who was that letter from?
Carlos Santos.
Did you have a chance yourself to look at the letter and see
Yeah.
what was written on the outside of it?
Yeah.
Did Brandy indicate what, if any, portion of the outside of the envelope had concerned her?
Not that I
call for
recall.
hearsay.
No. Not that I recall.
Okay, it was just the letter itself or the
Yeah.
envelope itself that you said was making her act nervous?
Yeah.
Okay. And you read it too, read the envelope too as well, correct?
Yes.
All right. How did you feel when you read the letter?
Your Honor,
Not the letter, I'm sorry.
Sustained, that's relevant.
Well, let me ask you this. During prior proceedings, you were subpoenaed by the state and a material witness warrant had to be secured in order to force you to appear, correct?
Yeah.
Why was that?
Because I was scared.
And to be clear, you weren't scared at all of Mr. Segura, anybody?
Didn't know anything about him.
So,
No.
no is the answer to that
No.
question, right? You weren't scared of Mr. Segura or
No.
anyone connected to Mr. Segura?
No.
Okay. That day, on the 19th, did you see the kids at all that day, the twins and Javante?
Not on the 19th. It had to be the 18th.
Okay. And when they came over and ate oxtail stew at your house that night, you weren't out there with them,
No,
right?
I
You
was.
were in the back bedroom?
Yes.
So you can't offer any testimony about that?
No.
Okay. No further questions for the witness at this time.
Well, Ms. Timmons talking about the kids. They had come over and eaten, and you actually texted Brandy and asked her whether she wanted any of that oxtail soup, correct?
I texted Brandon and asked her if she wanted something to eat, but I can't tell you what she. I didn't state in details what it was to eat, so I can't actually tell you if it was the oxtail soup or not.
Okay. And that was actually before 7 o'clock, right?
It was when I reread it. It was 6:53.
Okay. All right, no further questions. Hold on one second. She told you that she didn't want any food, right?
Yeah, she did say she didn't want any food
So
in
no,
the text.
you didn't see her or the kids? at
No,
that
I didn't
point?
see her. The text said no. She was good.
They were already back. They were at their house, correct?
I couldn't tell you.
Okay. No further questions this time.
Redirect?
No redirect.
All right, and juror, I have a question of this witness. All right, you can step in. Do we need to keep her any further?
Your Honor, this time she's going to ask her to retain it at this moment in time.
Okay. Do you want to have her on call? Or
Yeah,
you
she's
want
going
to
to
stay here?
stay here.
Do you have a number for
We do.
All right, be on call. Oh, your next witness.
Your Honor, can I ask for a brief break, please?
All right.
Thank you.
We've kind of been in and out, and y'all been in and out. It gets a little confusing sometimes. We'll take 10 minutes.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Either side need anything?
No, Your Honor.
All